The Assumption of Mary, Gateway of Hope. From the dawn of creation, humanity has sought the answer to a question that echoes through every age. What is our destiny beyond death? The grave seems to end every story, yet the human heart longs for more. An eternal home, a final victory over corruption and sorrow. In the fullness of time, God provided an answer not only through words but through a living person, Mary, the mother of Jesus. Her life was a masterpiece of grace, and her end was not an end but a glorious beginning. The Assumption of Mary, body and soul, into heavenly glory, stands as one of the most radiant mysteries of our faith, a beacon that points every believer toward their ultimate destiny. This truth does not belong only to theologians or scholars. It is the inheritance of every Christian, the hope of every heart. To understand Mary's Assumption is to glimpse our own future, to see in her what God desires for all his children. Mary's Assumption is not simply a legend or pious tale, it is a solemn truth declared by the Church and celebrated by generations. It is the flowering of a life lived entirely for God, the harvest of her faith, obedience, and love. Her Assumption is both a consolation and a call. A consolation because it assures us that death is not the final word, and a call because it summons us to walk as she walked, in holiness, humility, and total trust in God. The story of the Assumption begins not at the end of Mary's life, but at its very dawn. From the moment of her immaculate conception, she was preserved from the stain of original sin. Grace enveloped her from the first instant of her existence. This singular privilege prepared her to be the Mother of God, the living tabernacle of the Word made flesh. Because she was untouched by sin, death, the consequence of sin, could not hold her in corruption. Mary's earthly life was simple, hidden, yet filled with extraordinary faith. She said yes to the angel at Nazareth, stood at the cross on Calvary, and persevered with the disciples in prayer at Pentecost. Her journey was marked not by worldly triumphs, but by total surrender to God's will. When her mission on earth was complete, it was fitting that she should be taken into the fullness of life without delay. The Assumption was the crowning of all her virtues, the seal of God's promise, the visible manifestation of what he desires for every soul, eternal union with him. Through centuries, Christians have meditated on this mystery. The apocryphal writings of the early church spoke of Mary's peaceful falling asleep, the Dormition, and her being carried by angels into glory. The Eastern churches celebrated this feast long before it became universal in the West. Tradition whispered what the faithful always believed: the body that bore Christ, the heart that beat with his, would not see decay. In 1950, Pope Pius XII solemnly defined the dogma of the Assumption, that Mary, having completed the course of her earthly life, was assumed body and soul into heavenly glory. This declaration was not an invention, but the confirmation of a truth lived and cherished by the faithful for nearly 2 millennia. The Pope's words resounded: "It is a truth revealed by God that the Immaculate Mother of God, the ever-Virgin Mary, having completed the course of her earthly life, was assumed body and soul into heavenly glory." Why does this matter? Because in Mary's Assumption, the Church sees the destiny of humanity redeemed by Christ. She is the first to fully share in his resurrection. Her glory is the fruit of his victory. Her Assumption is the pledge of our own rising on the last day. In honoring Mary assumed into heaven, we do not worship her. We magnify God's grace at work in her. We see what grace can do in a human life, and we take courage. Her Assumption proclaims that our bodies too are sacred, destined for resurrection. It proclaims that history is not an endless cycle of decay, but a pilgrimage toward glory. Mary's Assumption also reveals her ongoing role as Mother of the Church. From her place in heaven, she intercedes for her children, guiding them through the storms of life. She who once carried Jesus in her arms now carries the prayers of the faithful before his throne. She who comforted the disciples now comforts us with her presence. As we contemplate her Assumption, we are invited to lift our eyes beyond the fleeting shadows of this world. Wars rage, cultures shift, kingdoms rise and fall, but the Assumption reminds us of the eternal. Mary's destiny is our destiny if we remain faithful. Her victory can be ours if we cling to Christ. The Assumption is not escapism. It is hope grounded in reality. Just as Christ rose, so shall we. Just as Mary was taken up, so shall the faithful be gathered into glory. This feast is not about leaving the world behind, but about seeing the world's true purpose, to prepare us for communion with God. In the Assumption, heaven and earth meet. The body formed of earthly dust is raised to heavenly splendor. The mortal becomes immortal. The weak becomes glorious. This is not myth, it is the very heart of the gospel. The Church celebrates the Assumption with joy because it touches every soul. At funerals, at gravesides, and moments of loss, the faithful remember Mary and find comfort. Her tomb was found empty not because her life was meaningless, but because it was fulfilled. And so shall it be for all who follow her Son. Throughout history, saints and artists have poured their devotion into this mystery. Painters like Titian and Rubens lifted Mary on clouds of light. Poets sang of her rising as dawn breaking upon the world. The liturgy resounds with hymns of victory. Today, the Virgin Mother of God was assumed into heaven as the beginning and image of your Church's coming to perfection. But beyond art and words, the Assumption is a lived reality. Pilgrims travel to shrines, families pray the rosary, children learn to whisper Mary's name. Her glory inspires courage in the weak, hope in the suffering, joy in the dying. Mary's Assumption is a proclamation. Sin does not have the last word, death does not have the last word, corruption does not have the last word. God has the last word, and his word is life. The story of Mary's Assumption is not only the conclusion of her earthly life, but the triumph of grace over sin, of hope over despair, of life over death. It is God's final word spoken over a faithful creature, not corruption, not oblivion, but glory. In Mary, humanity's destiny is unveiled. She is not an isolated miracle, but a mirror of the whole Church. What God has done for her, he intends for all his children. She is the first fully redeemed, the one in whom the promises of Christ are already complete. The Assumption is therefore not merely about Mary, it is about Christ. Her glory reflects his victory. Her rising is the fruit of his resurrection. Her crowning is the extension of his reign. To honor Mary is ultimately to magnify the power of her Son. As the Church journeys through history, she does so amidst storms, persecution, division, doubt, and sin. In the midst of these waves, Mary shines as the star of the sea, guiding believers safely to Christ. Her Assumption is the lighthouse that assures us, the harbor is real, the journey has meaning, and heaven awaits. No generation has been without its trials. Yet in every era, the faithful have lifted their eyes to Mary assumed into heaven and found courage. Crusaders once painted her image on their shields. Martyrs whispered her name at the stake. Missionaries carried her icons across oceans. Today, families pray to her in apartments, villages, and cathedrals alike. Her Assumption continues to inspire endurance. The Assumption also reveals the harmony of faith and reason. While philosophy contemplates immortality of the soul, Christianity proclaims the resurrection of the body. The Assumption embodies that union, soul and body glorified together. St. John Paul II once reflected, "In Mary's Assumption we contemplate what we profess in the Creed. I believe in the resurrection of the body and life everlasting." In her, theology becomes visible. Doctrine becomes flesh. Hope becomes history. But this feast is not only a comfort, it is a challenge. Mary's Assumption calls us to holiness. She was assumed body and soul because she had already surrendered body and soul to God. Her life was a continual yes, a fiat renewed in every circumstance. If we desire to share her glory, we must share her fidelity. Not by extraordinary feats, but by daily obedience, in prayer, in sacrifice, in love of neighbor. The Assumption reminds us that every humble choice has eternal weight. Every hidden act of virtue echoes into eternity. The Church Fathers often describe the Assumption as a liturgical procession, the angels descending to escort their queen, the apostles surrounding her tomb, Christ himself welcoming his mother with radiant joy. Heaven and earth sing together, "Arise, O Lord, and bring your ark into your holy dwelling." This vision is not mere poetry, but the deepest truth. Mary's life was a song of praise, and her Assumption is its final crescendo. Her Magnificat, sung on earth, resounds forever in heaven. One day, our story too will reach its final chapter. Death will come, graves will open, and the Son of God will call us forth. On that day, the Assumption will no longer be only Mary's feast, but the feast of all who belong to Christ. Until then, her glory is our compass. She stands at the finish line, urging us onward. She whispers to us in moments of weakness, "Do not be afraid. The crown is waiting. The glory is real. Follow my Son, and you will follow me." Therefore, let us not see the Assumption as a distant myth, but as a living promise. Let us entrust our struggles, our families, our nations to Mary, who reigns beside her Son. And let us live with eyes fixed on the horizon of eternity, where she already stands radiant, beckoning us home. Mary's Assumption is God's declaration that his love has the final word. In her, creation is healed, humanity is exalted, and the gates of heaven stand open. Final call to action for your video ending. Dear friends, if this message has touched your heart, do not let it fade away. Follow the path of faith as Mary did, and walk with hope toward eternity. Subscribe to our channel Catholic Faith and AMP. Hope to continue receiving inspiring stories of faith. Share this video so that others too may discover the beauty of Mary's Assumption and the hope of eternal life. And leave a comment below. What does the Assumption of Mary mean for you personally? Together, let us journey with Mary, the Mother of Hope, toward the glory that awaits us all.